This is Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, who chews the fat with entrepreneurs, startup founders and thought leaders on what it takes to traverse the wall between startup and scale up.
Show me the money. You might remember that quote made famous by Cuba Gooding Jr. and Tom Cruise in the 1996 film Jerry Maguire. But what happens when you, as a founder or CEO, is ready to sell your business and it's time for you to yell, "Show me the money"? My guest today is an expert in helping to sell B2B SaaS scale-ups. You're listening to Platform Diaries and I'm your host, Shane Williams. Lowell Ricklefs is founder and managing partner of Traction Consulting, a hands-on M&A firm. He's also a guest lecturer at universities across both the US and Europe. We discuss why it's important to be proactive in preparing for sale, how to find the best buyers, and the secrets to closing the best deal. I know you'll enjoy this interview. So Lowell, thank you for joining me on Platform Diaries.
Thanks, Shane. Great to be here. Good to see you again.
I've been really looking forward to catching up. I know it's taken us a little bit of a time with the time zones and whatnot to get together, but this is a topic I think makes a really good bookend for the season, and that is I want to try to cover so you've scaled your business, you've built it, you've got it to a point where you're ready to maybe exit, and you want to start trying to find the right acquirers, negotiating the best deal. So thanks for joining me. Just to jump straight in, why do you think it's important for a founder or CEO to be proactive in preparing for sale?
Well, the simplest reason is you'll get more for it if you take the time to prep for it. Not unlike if you sell your house, if you just throw it on the market in its current condition, you're probably not going to get what you would if you took the time to clean up the yard, do a little bit of landscaping, do a little bit of painting, maybe eliminate some of the junk that people don't like to see. You can do the same thing with your company. There are things that you can do. You've worked hard, often 5, 10, sometimes 20 years to build a business, and with a small amount of additional effort and planning, you can get another 10 to 20% for the company. So it's worth taking the time to take a step back and focus on cleaning up some things that need to be cleaned up before you sell it.
And so, if you think about who's done that well, and I don't necessarily need to name specific clients, but maybe just thinking around, I guess I'm trying to set the scene for, what does success look like?
Yeah, it starts with the metrics. So it's kind of the metrics, and then there's some back office things. I guess I'd probably put it in those two categories. So on the metrics, there are things like retention. Often there are small things that people can do around retention. For example, when you're trying to build a business, you may sign up anyone and everyone that's interested. If they stay, don't stay, you don't care, because you get some revenue, and some revenue is better than no revenue when you're trying to build a business. But at some point when you mature, if you look at publicly traded companies, they're very, very wise about who they count as an actual client and who churns. So some people might be in a trial period, and those trial period aren't truly long-term subscription clients, so they shouldn't hit your numbers. So that's one piece of it. Many people haven't thought much about pricing. Usually you can bump a 5 to 7 to 10% price increase without losing many, if any, clients. And that can bump your net retention by 5 to 10%. So there are little things that you can do, starting a year or more beforehand to do that sort of thing. And then optimize for profitability. Growth is key. You don't have to maximize profitability, but if the company is losing money, it's definitely tougher to sell, particularly in this current environment that we're in. So people want companies that they don't have to keep pouring money into. And then on the back office, there are things, for example, most of the companies we work with do cash accounting. They don't do accrual, which is okay, but you want to make sure that it's accurate. Make sure that all the expenses are actually logged in QuickBooks or whatever it is that you actually use. And then have a plan or a forecast that's pretty well thought through too. So down to the unit metrics, because people want to understand, they want to break your business down into its basic core unit metrics and make sure that as the business scales, it makes more money, that it doesn't start losing money. So it's worth spending some time to sit down and understand that. But some of the biggest things I see that trip people up is the financials just aren't accurate. And when people start digging into them, the business isn't what they thought it was, isn't as profitable, or expenses weren't actually properly recorded. Those two usually go together.
Okay, so we've done the work to think about what are some of our metrics, how are we making sure that we're profitable, and sort of cleaning up the yard, so to speak, to use your earlier analogy. And now it's time to find buyers. Now, if I was selling a house, I'd just go see a real estate agent. I'm going to unfairly position you similarly. Could you talk to me around how you go about, if you're a SaaS business, finding buyers and then, what do buyers care about?
Yep. Well, I think you have to think like a buyer. You can't sell a company to someone that doesn't want it. Companies are bought by people that feel like it's somehow going to improve their business. So what I see most people think about is they think about their customers, they think about their competitors, they think about the big players in their existing market. And that's sort of the pool of buyers that they tend to think of. It's pretty natural. But the reality is, if you take a step back, you got to think about segments of buyers. So you may have people that do what you do. You may be based in the US, they're based in Europe. They want a US footprint. So even though you do the same thing, they pick up your market share in your team in the US. Additionally, you may have people that have a product gap. So you may fill a product gap that they have. One example was we had a company, 10,000 Feet, that was acquired by Smartsheet. And 10,000 Feet did really well, a segment of something that Smartsheet needed. So that was a logical acquisition. But you create buckets, you create segments. So you've got the geographic expansion, you've got the product piece that goes in it. And I think the part that surprises most people is if you sell to the same buyer. So if you sell to the VP of HR, for example, your product may have nothing to do with what the buyer does, but the buyer sells something else to that same buyer. But if they've got a large install base, they've got an existing relationship, they've got a large sales force. It's more like a simple marketing campaign for them to introduce your company, your product, and they can increase revenue pretty quickly. So that's what tends to surprise people the most. So the first thing you do is figure out what segments make the most sense. And then you research the companies in that space that might be a fit. And then, we'll look at, are they acquisitive? Have they done acquisitions before? What kind of backing do they have? Are they publicly traded? Are they profitable? Do they have cash on the balance sheet? Are they PE backed? Are they VC backed? How many employees do they have? If they've got 7 employees, they're probably not going to pay $50 million for your company. They probably just can't. Sometimes they actually might. If they've got PE backing, were recently acquired, and the PE backer is looking for add-ons, then it's possible. So first you need to pick the segments, then you need to flush out the companies, then you need to do diligence on the individual companies to kind of see, is it plausible that they could buy it? And then there's the outreach piece to establish contact with them, much like you would with your product, and see if there's interest as a fit. So you need to qualify the buyers as well.
And so then when you're thinking about, qualifying them in and whatnot, what are some of the mistakes you see sort of founders or leaders of scale-ups make when sort of tackling that problem?
That's a really good question. One of the things that I see is buyers, often they know that there's a process being run, and doing due diligence on a company is a lot of work. And if they know that there are 30 other companies doing diligence and you're going to make a short list from those 30, they may not want to invest the time and the money to do a lot of diligence. So what some people will do is they'll have a 30-minute phone call, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they'll have a 30-minute phone call, and then they'll make a high offer on an indication of interest. And you'll see the entrepreneur says, this is great. These guys are easy to work with. I'll contrast that. We'll have another company that's doing heavy due diligence. They're asking really tough questions, and it can feel a little bit onerous or painful. And so an entrepreneur will feel like, well, these guys are easy and they've offered us a lot of money. These guys are difficult because they're asking all these tough questions and they're really starting to understand our business. And then they gave us a lower offer, so they'll go with the higher offer. And the reality is the higher offer was they were lazy. Right? They didn't want to do the hard work up front. So they threw out a high number so they'd make the short list to go to LOI. Then they'll do the hard work. And then they'll say, oh, wow, your net retention really isn't, 110%. It's really 98%. And they'll come up with 15 different reasons of why the company is no longer worth 50 million, but they think it's worth 25 million, or it's worth 50, but it's 20 cash up front and 30 million is going to be on earnout because they don't believe you're going to hit your forecast. Or even more common is they'll just back out. They'll just say, yeah, we don't want to insult you with a lower offer. This isn't that interesting. But they don't want to do the hard work until they're on the short list. So that's the biggest mistake I see. And then just coaching people through that, because it's hard when you see a higher offer to not want to take it. So we encourage buyers. In contrast, the lower offer is still acceptable. from someone that's done heavy due diligence, there's less likely to be a surprise. So, the industry average from LOI is that 50% of deals close, which means 50% fail for any number of reasons. The fault can be on the buyer side, the seller side. We close 90% of our deals. And part of that is we're part of it is we do more research than probably anyone does to find all the potential outlier buyers. Because you just need to find that one person that can rationalize paying that premium of 10 to 20%. And you've got a good outcome. But it's important to understand the motivation behind the buyers and some of the games that get played.
And so you talked about the mistake of, I guess, taking the easy route or the higher offer to begin with, and then falling into the trap of, well, DD has to happen at some point. Are there any other key mistakes you've seen founders make?
One of the things I see people do is they'll have a narrative that when you're selling a product, sometimes you can have a narrative and the reality maybe doesn't quite match up, but your clients might be happy. But if your narrative is we're a 40% growth company, we've got 20% profitability, I promise you at some point, someone's going to look at the numbers with a fine tooth comb. And if the data doesn't back up the narrative, that could be a big problem because that buyer may have backed out earlier if they'd had the facts, and then you're left without a buyer. It's important to be transparent. One, it's important to prepare and get your facts right initially, so you don't have to change them as time goes along. And then it's important to be transparent as things go along because it's a lot of work to go through an acquisition, and there's a lot of risk on the buyer side. So they're trying to eliminate risk, and you've got a certain amount of negotiating capital that you've got that you can negotiate for structure, for the amount, for your salary, for all those sorts of things. If that capital and goodwill gets used up simply explaining, oh, yeah, sorry, those numbers weren't quite right, or the trust level starts to drop. So it's important to get that stuff right.
Absolutely. And then sort of conversely to the mistakes, you talked earlier around making sure you've, cleaned up your yard and got your house in order and so forth. And then just more recently around the making sure your numbers stack up to your narrative. What are the other, if you want to call it that, secrets to success in getting the best outcome?
So a lot of it really is if you cast a wide net, because it's the quality of the buyers can be pretty different. There are, I call them the blue chip buyers that they hire the best employees on their side. They're the most professional to work with. Their goal is to buy the best companies. Think about Warren Buffett. His belief is to pay a reasonable price for a great company, right? He doesn't want a cheap price on a good company. He wants great companies. They'll have a similar philosophy. They'll pay, if not a premium, their goal is at least to not cut corners to get the best companies and then pull those together, invest in them well, and get a big exit. Most of the companies kind of fall in the middle. So they're reasonable, but they're also trying to get the best deal, trying to negotiate down. They may cut corners once you've got an LOI, cut costs. And then you've got the value buyers, people that buy broken and distressed companies, and they really try to lowball them. They buy them like really, really cheap. So part of it is you want to have options. So it's not just the price, but you want a quality buyer that will treat you well throughout the process and not try to just take every chance they get through the process, because the initial indication of interest and a price is really just the starting point. There are a lot of components and pieces to that once you've agreed on a price.
And just to sort of set an expectation, and the answer might be how long's a piece of string, but I'm thinking along the lines of, I'm a founder. I think this is where my next move is to get prepared for sale, and I've got to go out and help cast a net to find potential buyers and go through DD and whatnot. Is there kind of a typical yardstick in terms of how long that process takes?
Well, I would say, we've done a couple transactions in 4 months. That was the fastest. We had one that took almost 18 months, but we effectively sold the company twice. The acquirer got acquired before the transaction closed the first time. So it was almost like running two complete processes. But it's typically, to get to an LOI is usually, 3 to 4 months, depending on how long you negotiate the LOI. And then getting the purchase agreement signed can be anywhere from, 45 days to 90 days. and that can drag on longer as well. So, call it 6 to 9 months from kicking off a process to money hitting your bank account. And the median's probably right in that 6 to 7 months. Yeah.
And so you got 6 to 7 months. You're the founder. Is that most of your time spent on that, or what kind of level of investment of effort?
Yeah. The benefit of having an advisor, I mean, if you can afford to have an advisor, then, because I've done it both ways. I was a founder and I sold the company myself, and that was my full-time job, was selling the company. And then it was a part of acquiring a number of companies, and now we sell companies. It's a full-time thing that I do for founders. I do see, one, it's exciting, right? If you've been running a business for 5 or 10 years, this is the shiny, new, exciting thing to do, and there's a lot at stake. So it's often the thing that gets the best bandwidth in the morning. And it's hard because running a company as a CEO, you spin a lot of plates. You're already really busy, usually before you start a process. So I caution people that they need to continue to stay focused on running the business. Last thing you want is to be 4 months into a process and your business starts to dip because you took your eye off the ball. So I would say initially it's a small amount of work. It's a lot of work for us, a lot of grunt work to do the research and create the materials, do the outreach, qualification. Once you start having fireside chats, it's a modest amount of work, but it's kind of interesting because it's like speed dating. You're talking to all these different companies and you're learning a lot about them and what they do and what the fit could be. So you've got all these different visions of what the future of your company could look like. And then when you get into after an IOI, there's a little bit more diligence. Post LOI, once an LOI is signed, there's heavy duty diligence, and that can be pretty taxing. So the farther you get into the process, the more effort it is. And I would say the less interesting it is. It's grinding through a lot of legal documents, grinding through a tremendous amount of due diligence, trying to find IP assignment letters for your 4th employee when you had no revenue and you're all working in someone's kitchen and it was all just fun. But the buyer wants that person to sign it, and you haven't talked to that person in 6 years. You're not sure how to find them. So, there are a lot of threads like that to work through.
So you kind of alluded a little bit to this just there, where when we're talking about, what's the secret of success? And I think you sort of mentioned, hey, you need to lean on an advisor. And so maybe you could kind of talk a little bit more about, I'm a founder and I know I've got to go through this process and it could be daunting and I don't quite understand it. And there's going to be a lot of things that need to happen. How does someone like yourself, Lowell, and your attraction advising organization help founders?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've gone through it on my own as a founder, and it's a lot of work. But what we really focus on is the material creation up front. We'll do the heavy research. Obviously, you've got buy-in, and you'll give a lot of input to it. But we'll really drive all of that effort. We'll drive the outreach messaging. We'll qualify the buyers. And then we'll establish fireside chats with the founder. So that's their first chance to talk to you and to give you a chance to talk to them. So there's the big rock stuff that we do as we drive the process. And then we'll narrow that funnel. We'll set a date for indications of interest. We'll require people to, talk about how they'd structure the deal, what the price would be or what the price range would be, what level of buy off has to happen internally before they could buy it, what their source of funding would be. And we'll talk about, the strategy. Why do you want to buy the company? Like, where do you see the fit? Like, where do you think that would help? So there's the big part where we guide the process, but then along the way, just because we've been a part of a lot of transactions, we really sat in everyone's shoes, we're available to advise on a lot of the smaller topics that come up. Often there are, in any given transaction, there are hundreds of smaller topics and issues that are really, really important that people don't often think about. They just think about, I want to get 30 million for my company. But there are a lot of things that factor into it where we'll provide an opinion or give feedback, or we'll just say, yeah, there's 10% holdback. I thought it was all cash at close. They're saying 10% holdback. I feel like they're lying to me. I said, no, this is standard. There's an indemnification holdback. If they want 20%, that's too high. 10% is market. That's all reasonable. This happens on every deal. But just to be the voice of reason. And other times, the buyer may say, we want to keep all your cash, for example. And we'll say, no, the deal is going to be cash-free, debt-free. If you've got $2 million cash on the balance sheet, you're going to keep that. Like, if you sell a company for $20 million, you get the cash. It's effectively a $22 million deal. So there are a lot of things like that where I'll get calls sometimes on a daily basis to say, Lowell, well, what about this? And, I saw this, and what about that? So you just want a trusted advisor whose advice, you don't have to always take their advice, but sometimes you just need someone that you can ask an opinion, or sometimes they may feel like stupid questions. Like I've not seen this before. I don't understand this. Figuring out networking capital is one. And it's, when you're talking about millions on the front end, networking capital is usually in the hundreds of thousands on the back end. But by the time you get there and the capital is low on both sides, as you're working through this, it's a pretty big deal. So understanding networking capital is a little bit, I won't go into it deeply, but it's a little bit like if you're a baseball fan, it's a little bit trying to understand, some of the, they'll mix on base percentage with batting percentage, which doesn't make sense. And they'll add those together. Networking capital, you get you say it's cash free, debt free, but then you're counting some things that are in it that get added back. Most CEOs I work with, it kind of makes their head spin when they're trying to pick a networking capital target. We've been through that a bunch. We can tell people this is fair, or they'll see it go negative and they think, is this a bad thing or is this a good thing? If your target networking capital is negative, that's usually a good thing. So we'll confirm it's a good thing. So there are just a lot of things that are unique to doing transactions where it's helpful to have someone that's been there before.
Something you said there that kind of pricked my ears up, which was going through the conversation with the potential buyers and talking about, why do they want to buy, where do they see the product fitting, and trying to get their vision for where the company's going. Is that largely just because as a founder, I want to know that my ultimate vision for where this thing was going is where this company's going to take it? Or is it more around trying to reverse calculate the value that they're going to receive from buying it so you can push the price up?
That's actually a really good question. I've not been asked that before. It really kind of comes down to, I've got a background, enterprise selling background. So I bring that to this party because I feel like selling a technology company is more like selling a technology product than it is selling a financial instrument. But classic enterprise selling is you don't show up and say, I've got this plastic cup, it's round, it's 6 inches tall, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to show up and just start talking about your company. You want to say, tell me what you're thinking. What's on your mind? What keeps you up at night? Right. So you ask a question, what's of interest to you, or why are you interested in cups? Well, we're looking at this, this, and this. Well, now I know what you're thinking about, what you like, what you don't like. I can then talk about the things that are relevant to what you care about. Otherwise, I don't know you. I'm going to start at A, I'm going to go to Z. And guess what? 14 of the letters in the alphabet you don't care about. So you're just waiting for me to stop talking. So that's the big reason. And part of it is we want to qualify and say, why are we having this conversation? Like where do you guys see the fit? And often they'll say, hey, this is great. We've been working on this for years. We have a product in this space, but the churn's really high and you guys are sticky. So you guys have clearly cracked the code. Our guys are really good at this stuff, but that one's a little bit more creative. So we're really curious to see how that works and to see if it's a fit. If the people don't have a good answer, if their answer, or if they say, we're selling the munchkins and you do this, and you're at the end of the call, you're just like, this just doesn't make sense. We'll deprioritize them as a buyer because we just don't get it. Like it just doesn't make any sense. We've had a number of those before where we're scratching our heads. We're just like, I don't know why this doesn't make any sense. They either don't understand our business or they want us to be something that we're not because it just doesn't make sense. Other times we've gone into it where we had a deal recently. I won't mention the name, but in a space where there were large public bids and one company had massive market share because their software was free. And then to bid on the platform, you had to pay, where others sold to governments. Well, the hardest part is getting to the government. So it clearly made sense for these companies to come together. It was a no-brainer. If you were the buyer, of course you would want this company. Absolutely. Anyone could understand why there's nothing but huge upside for these two companies to come together. So when you see that, you're just confident that the deal's not going to fall apart. Because sometimes if the business case is a little bit flaky, you go through this enough, you just know you're just waiting for that phone call where the light bulb goes on for them. We're like, yeah, we just don't see it. This is a nice to have. They talk the classic vitamin pill or a pain pill, right? This is a nice to have. If it's a nice to have, there's a pretty good chance someone's going to wake up one day and say, I don't want to do it. But where it's a have to have, like I can double or triple my business by doing this. Like I can easily do that. That'll make sense. But the short answer is it guides the entrepreneur on what they should be talking about. Once you understand why they want to buy us, you can talk about why you think it's a good fit.
Right. So it's less so about going, you know what, the upside to company A is significantly more than the upside to company B, so I'm going to ask for more money. It's less about that, more about just making sure you can get the deal.
It's ultimately, once the buyer, I think selling companies is more about helping the buyer navigate the buying process than it is about selling or pushing. None of us want to be sold to or pushed on, but we love to buy, and we love when people help us buy things and make us feel good and answer the questions in a way that you feel really good about your purchase. And buying a company, I think, is much the same way. So to the extent that you can highlight things well enough and reinforce that fit well enough so that they feel like we have to have that, that will, in the end, give them the confidence to pay more because they believe, they're more confident that this thing is going to work. Because there's risk. Everyone's afraid that they're going to buy this company, it's going to fall apart. At the end of the day, CEOs, you got to have a strong ego, if not a big ego, and you got to be bold. But they're worried. They're worried that it's going to fall apart and they're going to look stupid. They don't want to look stupid. They don't want to fail. They want to keep their jobs, make a lot of money, and be successful. As opposed to a lot of bankers, they get this rigid process. It's just like an auction. Most bankers they're not natural salespeople. That's why CFOs don't run sales and marketing for a reason, right? That's not their skill set. Sales leaders don't run finances, right? They're just really different skill sets. But most bankers have finance background. They don't have those genes to be natural salespeople and ask those questions and guide the process. So they run a very rigid, structured process, and it's an auction. And it's a little bit more that these guys are paying 20. If you can pay 22, you're in. Otherwise, you're out. And it's more of a bang, bang, bang. And that's why half of them fail. Some people might hit those numbers, but then they'll have buyer's remorse. So they just don't feel good about it. But they didn't find that natural. Once you find the natural fit, you can stretch it to the natural. I think every deal has a natural max that people will pay. And if you exceed that, the deal will fall apart. So you want to get as much as you can. It's like The Price is Right, that old show. You want to get as much as you can without going over. Because if you go too far, on the one hand, you say, well, how can there be too much? Well, there can be where someone wakes up or someone in the approval cycle says, this is too rich. We're out.
Is that when you end up with a we'll sue you to buy our company situation like our dear friend Mr. Musk?
It could be. Well, it's like the stock market, right? Everyone, if it goes up 20%, you feel great. But then when it drops 10%, you feel terrible, even though it's still 10% above where you were before you felt good and then bad. That if the price goes up and then it comes back down, it feels terrible. And if it just goes up a little bit, if it just keeps going up, it just keeps feeling good. Just kind of the way we're wired as people.
Mate, I think that's a great way to end not only the episode, but the season. I really appreciate you taking the time to help us bookend it with how do you exit? How do you make the best possible decisions? I appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll get you back for season 3.
That sounds great. I appreciate the opportunity. I always enjoy our conversations.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. To find out about how Shane enables digital businesses to scale, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Thank you for listening.